Post-apocalyptic games are a dime a dozen these days. Of course we have Fallout, but also smaller titles like Metro and Rage. Even Zelda took a crack at the idea with Breath of the Wild. However, S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl is a game unlike any of those I just mentioned. With a brutally bleak atmosphere, its combination of FPS gameplay mixed with survival and RPG elements is a strange one. Do all of these elements make for a compelling experience? Or does this game's charm get lost within its gameplay systems? S.T.A.L.K.E.R was created and developed by GSC Game World, a Ukrainian game company that was formed in 1995. Before S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the company was primarily known for the Cossacks games, a series of real-time strategy games with a focus on history. Their first game, Cossacks European Wars, sold over 4 million copies, which was a huge success for the team of 4 who developed it. While continuing to work on expansions and sequels to the Cossacks series, they also set their sights on another genre, 3D action games. Originally titled Oblivion Lost, S.T.A.L.K.E.R was inspired by Roadside Picnic, a science fiction novel by Arkady Boris Strugatsky, and its film, which was appropriately titled S.T.A.L.K.E.R. While it may be easy to say that it was a little too inspired by these things, the term S.T.A.L.K.E.R was used for the scientists and engineers who explored the interior of Chernobyl in 1986. In its early state, the game was a linear shooter featuring 15 linear levels, sharing many qualities with Valve's Half-Life. But in 2002, the developers decided to create a larger world instead of just small linear levels. S.T.A.L.K.E.R uses GSC Game World's X-Ray engine, which has a unique focus on artificial intelligence called A-Life. A-Life supports more than 1,000 characters inhabiting the game's world, allowing for unique interactions across the game. Monsters and NPCs all have schedules and act on their own, which leads to an unlimited number of randomly generated quests for the player to participate in. The developers originally intended for the game to be fully A-Life, where any NPC stalker could complete the game before the player did. However, this was removed after a playable prototype, as the developers feared it would be too confusing to the player. In 2003, a pre-alpha build of the game was leaked via peer-to-peer file sharing networks. Despite not having most of the game's features, even missing enemies and every other important feature in the game, the quote-unquote demo was received well. Players say it played well and only served to hype up the game that had already been in development for years at this point. Publisher THQ got involved to try and complete the game for a 2006 release date, but this was eventually pushed to 2007. As the game had been in development for over 5 years at this point, many websites including Wired and IGN began referring to it as vaporware. In January of 2007, THQ announced a competition for players to play the full game in a 24-hour marathon session. Days before it was set to occur, it was reduced to 12 hours, and then eventually cancelled altogether. The game was released 2 months later, on March 20th, 2007, and received some pretty positive reviews. GameSpot gave it an 8.5, saying that, "It's got some quirks, but S.T.A.L.K.E.R delivers a dynamic and impressive first-person gameplay experience you won't soon forget." Eurogamer criticized the game's technical performance, saying that, "For some people, the odd, rough brokenness of S.T.A.L.K.E.R will frustrate and annoy," but then went on to say, "Not everyone is going to enjoy venturing into the zone, but some of those who do will find what they've been looking for." Like many PC games, S.T.A.L.K.E.R has a very dedicated modding community. Over the years, technical problems have been fixed, cut content has been re-added to the game, and the visuals have been upgraded among many other tweaks to make the game more playable than ever in 2018. Based on real-world Chernobyl, S.T.A.L.K.E.R takes place in an alternate reality where another disaster occurred in 2006, mutating or killing all inhabitants of the zone, the area surrounding Chernobyl. The game begins 6 years later in 2012, when the zone has become populated with stalkers, illegal residents who primarily deal with and smuggle radioactive artifacts and unidentifiable objects. The zone is also populated with different forms of mutated animals and humans. Some of the more common enemies include mutated dogs and bloodsuckers, mutants that have sharp claws, tentacles, and can turn invisible, leading to many jump scares. There is a wide variety of different creatures throughout the game, and for the most part, all have pretty unique behavior. If all of this wasn't enough, there are also environmental hazards as well. Anomalies are small areas with altered physics thanks to the disaster. You have a detector which beeps when an anomaly is near, but these are all dangerous to the player, with some resulting in serious damage or even instant death. Some can create fire, electricity, control gravity, or a number of other things which can pose a serious threat. If you're not careful, an anomaly can just come in and kill you in seconds. Anomalies create the radioactive artifacts I mentioned earlier, which can be equipped for stat boosts or sold for money. Radiation also poses a threat. In areas with high radiation cannot be passed through until you have the proper equipment to do so. Sometimes you can power your way through it with healing items, but most of the time trying to do so will result in death. We play as a stalker referred to as the Marked One, looking for someone named S.T.A.L.K.E.R. We have no memory of who we are, where we are, or how we became injured, just our mission to find S.T.A.L.K.E.R. and our tattoo of the word Stalker. The Marked One then completes quests for many different merchants and scientists, doing any number of tasks to get him closer to S.T.A.L.K.E.R. This can be things like infiltrating a lab or delivering sensitive materials. Eventually, we get the location of S.T.A.L.K.E.R.'s underground base, along with a doctor who was part of his team. When we finally meet this doctor, he tells of a unique artifact called the Wish Granter, and that we are S.T.A.L.K.E.R.
What a twist!
After more quests, we eventually find ourselves at the compound with the Wishmaker. This is where the game can unexpectedly end if you're not careful. There's a secret underground lab that will explain all of the secrets to the game's story, but if you don't do that first and just go to the Wish Granter, you'll receive one of 5 endings based on your reputation, the amount of money you have, and whether or not you killed the faction leaders. They all feature S.T.A.L.K.E.R. wishing for something and getting poor results. We got the positive ending, which is the best of the false endings. This really frustrated us. So much so that when we got one of these endings instead of the true ending, we didn't even go back and complete it again, as our save files put us in a spot where we would have had to play a large chunk of the game again. Keep in mind, this game is over 20 hours long, so we just watched the ending on YouTube. If the game had given us any indication that we had to complete those quests in a specific order, then we would have done so. Instead, we were left with a bad taste in our mouths after our playthrough. So if you go to the secret lab, you'll meet an entity known as the C Consciousness, who is responsible for everything. After the initial Chernobyl incident, the Soviets began conducting experiments there to varying results. A hive mind of neurally connected scientists is created from these experiments, called the C Consciousness. Once the Soviet Union is no more, the C Consciousness takes over the zone and continues experimenting. It eventually attempted to create world peace through mind control, failing to do so and creating the zone as we know it. The Wish Granter was created to draw in stalkers and brainwash them to do tasks for the C Consciousness. Stalkers who are brainwashed receive the Stalker tattoo that S.T.A.L.K.E.R. has. Soon after these events, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. and a group of 3 friends go looking for the Wish Granter. After being knocked unconscious, all of his friends escape, with 2 being killed and Doc surviving. The C Consciousness, not knowing who S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is, brainwashes him and gives him the mission of finding and killing himself, setting up the beginning of the game.
I'm the last person I would have suspected, but I was looking for me all the time!
After being told all this, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is given the choice to merge with the C Consciousness or to destroy it. To get the true ending, you have to destroy it. So after fighting your way to its source and killing the scientists, the C Consciousness is no more. The game ends with S.T.A.L.K.E.R. in an open grassy field. The zone is apparently gone, and he gets a seemingly happy ending. The graphics for S.T.A.L.K.E.R. are passable. Its realistic style doesn't quite hold up, and it was hardly cutting edge even for the time. While its bleak style and atmosphere do a good job to outweigh the blandness of the visuals, when compared to other games the year it was released, it doesn't quite stack up. However, there are many interesting design choices in the environment. Almost every house is deteriorating, and when you go in to look for loot, you'll rarely find it. Unlike most games where you'll conveniently find the items you need in the most obvious places, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. holds true to its story and survival gameplay, making you have to look for the items that you need. The mutant design, on the other hand, is very cool. All of the mutants are unique from one another, and even though not a lot of interesting things are done with them, they look terrifying nonetheless. The game is also very lacking in the way of music. Its main theme is boring, and all of the other music doesn't do much to stand out. However, most of the experience is spent wandering the world, with little to no music, and it works very well. It makes things very tense, and it, combined with the sound design, can create some very chilling moments. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. features a decent amount of voiceover, and most of it is bad. It feels like the lines are being lazily read a lot at the time. And every single time you walk into certain areas, you'll hear the same repeated lines, which gets old very f***ing fast.
I said come in, don't stand there. I said come in, don't stand there.
While it may seem like we're pretty down on the game so far, it's time to get to what you'll actually be doing in S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The game is billed as a survival horror first-person shooter, and while the latter half may be correct, it's got a little survival and barely any horror. It plays like a competent FPS. There are lots of different weapons, grenades, and knives. You have one slot for a main weapon and one for a handgun. The shooting feels good, and we never had any significant problems with it. Health regenerates very slowly, so good luck finding bandages and medkits. You can equip armor to lighten the blows, but everything you use has the ability to get damaged and ultimately can break. Damaged armor is all but useless, and you'll be kicking yourself when your gun jams at the absolute worst time. This is where the survival aspect comes into play. You'll have to eat as hunger plays a part in the game, but it doesn't quite make much sense that hunger is involved, but not thirst or sleep. But whatever. Most of this just boils down to inventory management. You have a certain weight that dictates the amount of items you can carry. This just turns into you being able to carry a few extra weapons, healing items, food items, and other small accessories. If you carry too much, your stamina will drain much faster while running and jumping, and will also regenerate just as slow. So generally this means you can't pick up everything you find. You'll have to decide what is necessary and make choices accordingly. This is not an RPG, so no stats will change over the course of your playthrough. The only thing you can do is equip artifacts, which can increase your stamina, damage, resistances, and other abilities. These artifacts can also hurt you just as much as they help, so finding the right balance of artifacts usually takes time. While this focus on realism and survival can get frustrating at times, we praise the game for sticking to it as it creates a more thoughtful and engaging experience without totally going overboard. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is an open world game. You'll travel between 18 different maps separated by loading screens. There are no vehicles in the game, so you'll be walking and sprinting for the entire game. This means that artifacts and inventory management play an important role. While the world may look very interesting at first, there's really not that much to do in it. Like I mentioned before, the developers sought to create a living world with all kinds of NPCs and creatures on their own schedules. And for the most part, they succeed. They created a living, breathing, depressing world. This system does have a few pretty significant negative impacts though. From the beginning of the game, you can run into roaming packs of stalkers who will eventually follow you back to the first main hub. And when you can't kill them, they can kill everyone in the town. You'll then get a bunch of quest failed notifications, which can really overwhelm somebody when they just started a new game. We didn't know if we did something wrong, so we restarted the game multiple times because of this. But soon after, we realized that controlling the game to our liking was pretty much out of our hands. There were several times we went to an area we previously visited, only to discover that a fight had taken place. This means that while you're off doing a quest, an NPC can decide to kill the man you're doing the quest for, resulting in your quest failing. The other aspect to this system is that you'll clear out an entire camp, go to another area, and come back minutes later to find another camp full of enemies. It's frustrating, and it just leads you to run past everything after you realize it's not worth it to engage them. The best example of this is a train yard that we ran past several times. If we were low on supplies, it was best for us to stop there and mow down the handful of enemies that would always spawn there, as their movements were predictable by the 30th time. The quests, whether they be main or side quests, usually boil down to killing a bunch of creatures or people, or going into a building, killing a bunch of creatures or people, and maybe collecting an item. For the most part, the story is interesting, minus our bad ending experience, but what you'll find yourself doing for a good chunk of this game is running. Running to turn in quests, running to start quests, getting confused using the game's map. So much of our footage is us just running, trying to do as much as possible to complete side quests before the time runs out, and then realizing that none of them really matter anyways. Even exploration never truly pays off, as your limited inventory can get frustrating when you find something really cool, but can't carry it. Now I'm sure at this point you're saying to yourself, based on everything they've said,
There's no way
that S.T.A.L.K.E.R holds up. And that's where you're wrong. The one thing that S.T.A.L.K.E.R succeeds at is always making the player wonder what's going to happen next. What new monster or anomaly are we going to find? What new weapons will we find? And will we even be able to carry them? We may be frustrated by its end, but the main story kept us interested throughout. Despite all of its faults, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a fun game to play. Even though it feels and looks dated, the shooting feels good. And it means that even if you have to run for 5 consecutive maps, at least when you finally get there, you'll be having a good time. S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl holds up, and should be played by anyone looking for a unique, post-apocalyptic shooter. Its dark atmosphere and commitment to its systems creates a very different type of exploration-based shooter. If you can look past its faults, it's a game worth playing.
Get out of here, Stalker.
I said come in. Don't stand there.